Ok, rồi sau chúng ta đi continue.
Hi, in this lecture, I'm going to show you all about the BIOS sizes. So let's check this BIOS, for example. As you can see, we have 25Q32, okay? 32 BVS, 32, okay? So in this BIOS, we have 32, as you can see. 32 means 4 megabytes. The size of this BIOS is 4 megabytes. I will show you how I calculate this 4 megabytes, okay? So 8 megabit equal 1 megabyte, okay? Why? Because 8 bit equal 1 byte. So 16 bit will equal 2 byte, 32 bit will equal to 4 byte, and 64 bit will equal to 8 byte. That's why when you find here, as you can see between Q and F, 8 means the IC size is 1 megabyte. 16 means 2 megabyte. 32 means 4 megabyte. And 64 means 8 megabyte. Always you should divide it by 8, as you can see. Because 8 bit equal 1 byte, so 8 megabyte divided, you should divide 8 by 8, we will get 1. 16 divided by 8, we will get 2. 32 divided by 8, we will get 4, and also here we will get 8. Okay, so let's check some BIOSes IC. So here, as you can see in this motherboard, this is the BIOS IC. So let's check its size. So let's check its size, as you can see here. So we have 25Q16, as you can see. So 25Q16 BVS. So here you can find here BVS or if WVS, no problem. But always you should focus into two numbers after Q. Okay. So as you can see here in the BIOS, we have, as you can see, 25Q16. So 16 means 2 megabyte, as you can see. So 16 means 2 megabyte. Because 16 means 2 megabyte. So this BIOS, if you want to reprogram this BIOS, you should reprogram it or flash it with a program flash that is equal to 2 megabyte or less than 2 megabyte. You cannot reprogram it with a flash more than 2 megabyte. You know why? Because the IC has as a maximum size 16 megabit, means 2 megabytes. Okay, so let's check another motherboard. So for example, for this motherboard, as you can see, we have here the BIOS. So let's check its reference and then its size. So as you can see here, we have 25Q32. Okay, Q32. So 32 here means 4 megabytes. 32 means 4 megabytes. And as you see in the BIOS, we have 25Q32 BVS. Okay, we can find here FWS or BVS. No problem. Always you should check or focus on the number after Q. Okay, so let's check again. So we have 25Q32. 32 megabit means 32 divided by 8 equal 4 megabits. Okay, so this is the working principle of the BIOS sizes. So for this, as you can see here, 1 means 1 megabit equal 128 kilobytes. 2, if you find 2 here, means 256 kilobytes. If you find 4, means 512 kilobyte. Okay, here also if you find 128 means 16 megabyte. Why? Because if you divide 128 by 8, you will find 16. Okay, why? Because 8 bit equal 1 byte. Okay, so 256 megabit equal 32 megabyte. But the most used BIOSes is the BIOSes IC with 8, 16, 32 and 64 megabit. Okay, so this is the main important tips that you should know about BIOS sizes, because if you want to reprogram the BIOS, you should first know about its size. Why? Because when you know about its size, you can compare between the BIOS size and the size of file, the flash file that you will use to program the BIOS. For example, if you have a BIOS with 2 megabytes, okay, for example, let's assume that here we have 16. Okay, so we have 25 Q, okay, 16 BVS. This is just a reference EG. Okay, so we have 16. 16 means 2 megabytes. So this BIOS has 2 megabytes, okay, of size. So the file, okay, the file that we will usually find with bin extension. Bin means binary, okay, binary, okay. So this file should be less than or equal 2 megabytes. This file that we want to use to flash this IC with this reference should be less than or equal to megabyte. Why? Because the maximum size of the BIOS IC, of this BIOS IC, is 2 megabyte. Okay, the same for example 32 here.
Về cách tính một file lập trình cho con BIOS 16 bit, tối đa nó nạp được chỉ có 2 megabyte, đó 2 megabyte.
The file should be less than or equal 4 megabytes, and so on. Okay. In this lecture, I'm going to show you all about the BIOS sizes. So let's check this BIOS, for example. As you can see, we have 25Q 32. Okay, 32 BVS 32. Okay, so in this BIOS we have 32, as you can see. 32 means 4 megabytes. The size of this BIOS is 4 megabytes. I will show you how I calculate. So first you should put them. So as you can see here, for example, in this motherboard, this is the BIOS chip, as you can see, with 8 pins. Okay. Usually the BIOS is near to the Super IO, as you can see. You will find usually the BIOS near to the Super IO or near to the ICH. So let's plug the power adapter and then check the pin number 8 of the BIOS. As you see in the schematic, always you will find 3.3 volt in the pin number 8 of the. Put the multimeter to the DC voltage to 20 volts and then press power button. So as you can see here, for example, in this motherboard, this is the BIOS chip, as you can see, with 8 pins. Okay, usually the BIOS is near to the Super IO, as you can see. You will find usually the BIOS near to the Super IO or near to the ICH. So let's plug the power adapter and then check the pin number 8 of the BIOS. As you see in the schematic, always you will find 3.3 volt in the pin number 8 of the BIOS without powering on the laptop. We have this dot here, means this is pin number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 and 8. So let's check pin number 8. So as you can see in the multimeter, we have 3.3 volt. So if you find that 3.3 volt in pin number 8 of the BIOS, but the laptop still does not work, means you should reprogram the BIOS, because about 90% the file or the firmware inside the BIOS is corrupted. So as you can see in the schematic, we have in the pin number 3 volt also. As you can see in the schematic, in the pin number 3 write protect, we have 3 volts. So let's check pin number 3. So 1, 2, 3, we should find 3 volt, as you can see. So pin number 4, we will find 0 volt because the pin number 4 is connected to the ground. So let's check the clock. So the clock exists in pin number 6. So we have here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is pin number 6. So let's check. Here we have 1.5 volt. Okay. So the clock is okay. So the power of the BIOS seems on. So if you have a failed motherboard and you check the 3.3 volt in the pin number 8 of the BIOS and you find it good, you check the clock, you find it good, means you have problem with the firmware inside the BIOS. You should flash or program the BIOS and you will solve the problem. So first, you should hi. So in this lecture, we're going to see the BIOS chip pin configuration. We're going also to see how to download the circuit diagram of every BIOS chip you want. We're going also to see the schematic of the BIOS chip, and of course we will see some real BIOS chip in the motherboard, and we will use the multimeter to check.
Con chip này tôi giới thiệu cho. Nó sẽ có GND, cái tốc độ của RAM, nó đọc. VCC là voltage gì đó, frequency là dương thì có biểu ở đây là cục dương, đây là nó đọc. Còn IO1, IO2, IO3 là input output 1 3. CS tôi không biết, CLK là clock, và cái chân xung đồng hồ ạ. Đây gì chị?
It's pins to check the VCC pin and of course to check the ground pin, etc. So let's get started. So as you can see here, this is 8-pin BIOS chip, as you can see. But first, I will show you how to download any BIOS chip you want. So let's assume that, for example, we have a BIOS chip with this reference 25Q16BVS IG. Okay, so here we have 16, so this is the size of the BIOS chip, so 16 in megabit.
Công thức máy tính may là vẫn là phần rác chưa xóa, chép lại cho anh em xem. Restore lại cái video này, con coi cái này.
Hi,
Because
16? Why? Because when you know about
chép cái lại tiếp sai á, tính và những công thức nữa là
size okay. So this file will 2 megabytes. Okay.
hai cái quên mất công thức tính. Thì tại sao những video trên Udemy này rất là tốt, bởi vì nó là những cái thực tế của kỹ sư họ học để lại, họ là lý thuyết nó vào nó gọi như chương trình đại học.
Hi again. So 16 megabit equal to 2 megabyte, as we have seen in the previous lecture, where we discussed about the BIOS chip sizes. So let's go to Google and type this reference 25Q16PVSIG and then press enter. So as you can see here, we have the first result. We have here 25Q16BVSIG. So let's get to this first result. So here we have the same reference, as you can see here.
Cái công thức 16 là 16 2 megabyte 6 bit này. Cái 6 bit là 23, 23 là 20. Ở đây nữa.
So this is 16 megabit serial flash memory, as you can see. So 16 megabit means 2 megabytes. Okay, so let's go here and download the data sheet. So let's just click here, download. So here we go. Here we have the file, as you can see. So we have 25Q16BV, as you can see also here we have the 25Q16BVS or BVF. This is interchangeable, FIG or BVSIG, no problem, because this is the interchangeable. Okay, all these are interchangeable. This BIOS reference BVSIG is the interchangeable with this. Okay, so now let's see the pin configuration. As you can see here, this is the table of content where we have all about this BIOS. We have here the pin configuration. As you can see, you can read about every pin, its working principle. Okay, so let's go directly to the pin configuration. Okay, so here, as you can see, we have the features. As you can see here, this is 25Q16BV. As you see, 16 megabit or 2 megabyte, as I told you. Okay, so because 8 bit equal 1 byte, so this is 16 megabyte or 2 megabyte. So here we have many features. As you can see, you can read all these features, and here, as you can see, we have the pin configuration of this BIOS. Okay, so this is the pin number 1. Always we have this mark here in the pin number 1. Okay, this is the pin number 2. As you can see, this is input output. Data, as you see, DO means data output. Okay, here we have the WP, the write protect. Okay, here we have the ground. Always the BIOS chip in the pin number 4 is connected to the ground. We will see this in the motherboard. Okay, in a real motherboard. So here we have pin 5, we have DI. This means data in. Okay, so data out and data in here. Here we have the clock. Okay, this is for synchronization. This is the clock. Every IC should receive a clock signal. Okay, for the synchronization. Okay, so this is the clock. Here we have the hold for input output, and here this is the VCC. Always the 8-pin BIOS is powered in the pin number 8. So in the motherboard, when you want to check whether the BIOS is receiving the power or not, you should check the pin number 8, and you have to find 3.3 volt. Okay, when you plug the adapter in the power jack of the laptop motherboard, you should go directly to the BIOS and you should find 3.3 volts in the pin number 8 without powering on the laptop. Okay, So this is the pin configuration. So here, as you can see in this table, this is the pin description, as you can see. Okay, so always the pin number 1 is, as you can see, this is chip select. Pin number 2, as you can see, this is data output. So always in the pin number 1, we have the chip select, as you can see. The CS means chip select input. This is the data output, as you can see. This is the write process input. Always in pin number 4 we have ground, data input, as you can see in pin number 5. We have clock in pin number 6, select.
Data input, data output.
Clock, as you can see, hold in pin number 7, and the power supply, as you can see here in the pin number 8, VCC. Okay. So now I will show you the schematic of the BIOS in a real laptop schematic. So this is a laptop schematic, no matter the type of the laptop, because I teach to you the working principle. If you complete this course, you will learn the working principle of how you can flash the BIOS, what is the BIOS, the pin configuration of the BIOS, the schematic of the BIOS, etc. So the working principle is the same. If you get and understand this course, you will understand any schematic and any pin configuration of any BIOS chip. Okay?
DDR RAM, 3 thằng RAM, đây là Bluetooth, LED 2 cái. Và đây có những người ta biết USB, cộng USB, cộng PC.
So for example, here we have the table of contents for the schematic. As you can see here, let's check for the BIOS. Here we have the ICH, as you can see here we have the DC battery changer, select battery connector, the system power 3V, 5V. Here we have the processor, the GMCH, the DDR, this is the RAM. So here we have LCD connector, this is the ICH and the storage. We have the SPI. SPI means the BIOS chip. Okay, so here we have the CPI, as you can see. So always the BIOS is near of the Super IO and also near of the ICH. So the BIOS is in page 38. So let's go to page 38. Here we go. So let's zoom in a little bit. So as you can see here, so this is the BIOS. As you can see, the same pin configuration. Okay, we have here. So the output signal, this is the write protocol, this is the VSS, always connected to the ground. Here, of course, this is another type of BIOS in this schematic. This is not a wind bond, this is SST 25L F080A. So this is another type of BIOS, but as I told you, the working principle is the same. This course will teach you how you can deal with the BIOS, how you can program and reprogram any BIOS you want. Okay, so as you can see, the pin number 4, as I told you, is always connected to the ground. So here, as you see, we have pin 5. Okay, we have here the clock, the hold, and the VDD. As you can see, we have 3V. Always in pin number 8, you should find 3V. Okay, so as you can see in this laptop motherboard, this is the BIOS. As you can see, here we have this. So here, as you see, program and reprogram any BIOS you want. Okay, this pin into the VCC.
Ok. Tải phần mềm cái mặt rồi. Và on-tune design. Cái thì về bộ nhớ thì nó đang cố gắng tối đa bộ và cái quan trọng nhất là lắp lát. Cái này thì sẽ dạy cơ bản về các phương tiện chở điện, xe điện, mọi thứ nó điện. Gọi là cơ bản thôi. Mọi người cũng muốn làm xe điện thì làm chủ công nghệ. Nhớ làm chủ đi. Sao này Còn cái MATLAB đâu. Đây 19 GB, 7 GB á, nặng phải ra. Để nén ra thì phải xóa cái file ráp. Xóa cái file ráp thì có vấn đề gì lại bỏ cái này vô cái ổ này rồi ổ này cấm thầy mẹ data video hết đời nó lưu thôi cóp lại tao sẽ cóp cái bỏ vào ổ này. Ổ này thì là ổ để trình ISO này sắp lên Reboot Inventor tao sẽ có qua đây trước vui vụ nhớ xong để cài vấn đề gì rồi.
So to check the BIOS, let's use the multimeter. Let's first put the multimeter selector to the buzzer option, as you can see here, and or to the continuity option, and then press the power button. Okay. So as I told to you, always the pin number 1. We have pin number 1, 2, 3. Always the pin number 4 is connected to the ground. So let's check pin number 4. As you can see here, let's check first the continuity. The continuity is seated correctly. So I will put the read probe in the pin number 4 and then the other probe in the ground, as you can see. So as you can see in the
đo mạch. Ok. Cái gì tôi quên mẹ rồi ta. Copy. Cái này đã xong. Và trong YouTube để MATLAB để ông xem. Ok. Chữ ký số bằng blockchain này. Right.
multimeter, low means the pin number 4 is connected to the ground. The pin number 8 should not be connected to the ground because the pin number 8 is connected to the power rail, as you can see. It's not connected to the ground. Okay. So we have here another BIOS, as you can see. Here we have this hole here, means this is the pin number 1, 2, 3, and 4. Let's check the pin number 4. Always the pin number 4 should be connected to the ground, as you can see. And here we have the pin number 8. We should check whether we have 3 volt or not when you plug the power jack here in the power jack, or when you plug the adapter in the power jack. Okay. So what you should remember is that the power or the BIOS chip is always near to the IC edge or to the Super I/O. As you can see here, we have the Super I/O. Directly under the Super I/O, as you can see, we have the BIOS, as you can see here. Okay. So, and the BIOS, the 8-pin BIOS that is used frequently in the motherboards, composed of 8 pin. Always the pin number 4 is connected to the ground and the pin number 8 is connected to the VCC. Okay? Hi again. So, in this lecture,
có vào thời gian anh em nghiên cứu clip là 6%. Tốc độ có cũng khá nhanh, từ SSD sang HDD thì đang xem bãi cho cái tính không được cái mức video như vậy. BIOS phone.
Hi everyone. So in this lecture we're going to see the BIOS faults. So the first fault is the computer won't start. So even if you press the power button but the computer won't start, this failure is one among the BIOS failure. Of course, after checking the power for the computer, for example, if you have a laptop, you should check the adapter. If you find that the adapter is good, so the BIOS can be the first cause of this failure. The second failure is the black screen. When the laptop is on, but the screen still black, no data in the screen, means the probable cause of the failure is the basic input-output system, the BIOS. You should reprogram it. So of course, for the black screen, there is many reasons. For example, problem in the RAMs, in the random access memory. The problem can be also in the graphic card. But if you check the random access memory and all things in the computer seems to be good, then the problem is in the BIOS. You should flash the BIOS using a new program. The third fault is the BIOS errors. When you get a lot of errors while you start your computer, means you have a failed BIOS. The fourth fault of the BIOS is the computer won't start and the power leads or the caps locks lead blank. When you have the power lead blank or the caps lock lead blank, means you have probably a failed BIOS. Okay? The next fault is the dead motherboard. If you have a dead motherboard, when you press the power switch or the power button, but you didn't get any response, no light, no indication in the computer, means the probable cause of failure is the BIOS. You should reprogram your BIOS. Of course, you should first check your adapter. If you have a laptop, you should always check your adapter, especially if you don't install the battery. Okay? When you have a good adapter or a good battery and the computer won't to start up, means the problem is in the BIOS. You should reprogram it. Of course, I will show you in the next lectures how to program the BIOS step by step. Okay? The next failure of the BIOS is no data in the computer screen. This failure is the same failure as the black screen, but sometimes you can get a black screen or a white screen, okay, or even a blue screen, etc. When you get this kind of screens with no data in it, the BIOS probably is the cause of this failure. So you should reprogram the BIOS. And of course, in the next lectures, I will show you how to reprogram the BIOS and how to back up the software in the BIOS first. Because always you should make a backup of your BIOS before reprogramming it, because you can need this backup again. Okay? So the next failure of the BIOS is beeps. When you hear a lot of beeps, maybe 2, 3, 4 or even 5 when you start the computer, maybe the problem can be in the BIOS. But first you should check the RAM, the random access memory slot. So if you find that the random access memory slot is installed correctly, okay, And you should check also the hard disk drive and also the CMOS battery, all connectors in the motherboard. And you should check that the power is good.
Ok, tự nhiên nhớ cái này. Tự đâu? Tự đâu? Quên mà. Nó rồi. Chịu. Còn
The whole motherboard. And if you check all this component, the RAM, the HDD, hard disk drive, the CMOS battery, all connectors, the power is good in the motherboard, and the failure still persists. I mean, always the beeps still persist when you start up your computer, means you have the problem in your BIOS. You should flash your BIOS. The next failure is when you check all voltages in the motherboard, you find that all voltages are present. You find the 19 volt, you find the 3 volt and 5 volt. Computer is on, all voltages are present. The 5 volt for the USB connector, the 3 volt are present. In the pin number 8 of the BIOS, you find all voltages, but the computer still not on the screen, still black screen or white screen. This is a good sign that you have the problem in the BIOS. You should remove your BIOS and flash it or reprogram it using the program, and then the computer will work fine. So this is the most important and the most BIOS failure that you will get during repair. If you get one of this failure that we discussed, you should reprogram the BIOS. But the first thing to do is to back up the BIOS. So we will see all this in the next lectures. Hi again.
ok. Thì xong. Thế là... Xíu.